joined by Greg Lukianoff. He is the president of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, the leading organization fighting for free speech on college campuses. I started the conversation by telling Greg that though I respect his work at FIRE and loved the book he and Jonathan Haidt wrote, The Coddling of the American Mind, I'm most excited to interview a true liberal. Here is his response.
Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So the nature of my show, I don't know if how much Ryan told you about it, but I'm a solutions guy. And I think that where we need to go in this country is more in the middle. And obviously what we're getting is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So I try to bring people on center left, center right to say, okay, this is the problem. Let's talk about the problem. And then, you have an expertise. We talk about what you know. And then at the end say, so what do we do about it? But everybody wants to talk about Trump, good or bad. Everyone talks about Obama. Those are the two the left and the right hate. And I say, whatever you say Trump added or hurt the conversation, racism was here before. So quit acting like he's the cause of the problem. So you need to talk about the root of the problem before you get to it. So I think it's a great premise, but here's the problem. I'm center right. It's harder to get people who are center left on because we are so divided. It's like, well, I don't want to talk to you. You disagree with me on an issue.
Yeah.
But
I agree. And I think I'm coming to sort of condemn myself for accepting for too long the sort of, if you're conservative, you don't really like it, it's best not to be morally polluted kind of idea. I think that academia has gotten us to accept a whole series of taboos in favor of actual argumentation. And I think it's really toxic to society.
Now, that was good, but he didn't end there. He went on to give some pretty impressive information about the left and liberals and how they view conservatives. Clip 2, please.
There's a whole little ecosystem now of people who are left of center, saying exactly, the kind of problems that Haidt and I bring attention to in our book. What's funny, though, is that you watch this, rhetorical approach. It's already dismissed everyone who's conservative. It's already dismissed everybody who, likes Trump. And for those of us who are actually left of center but think this is a problem, for example, people who signed the Harper's letter also and you're reaching the point where it's kind of like, so you're able to quickly dismiss the fact that 85% of the population of the planet disagrees with you, but that doesn't count.
Now, this is the reason why I like talking to liberals. We can disagree on policy, but my push has always been the culture. And I say that there's a lot of people out there who disagree with you on policy, but understand that this stuff is a problem. He just said that 85% of the planet doesn't agree with the far left, but you wouldn't think that when you wouldn't even think that watching conservative media, because it's so, so many of the voices are being silenced, and which we'll get to. But next he gave a brief summary of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Clip 3, please.
Sure. To really boil it down, Coddling of the American Mind is a detective story of trying to figure out what was so different about the kinds of students who were hitting mostly elite college campuses around 2013, 2014. The reason what originally put us onto this were two different things. One, there was a sudden dramatic shift in student attitudes about speakers and free speech that suddenly, and I'm the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. It's been my lifelong calling to defend free speech. I, somewhat to my surprise, ended up focusing on campuses. But for most of my career, students had actually been really good on free speech, believe it or not. And the shift was really sudden, really dramatic when it came to students, demanding disinvitations, demanding new speech codes. And this was unprecedented, at least since 2001 when I'd started. So there was this dramatic shift on campus that was troubling from a free speech perspective. But the thing that got me working with Jonathan Haidt, my co-author, a great a great psychologist, is that students were increasingly justifying this in terms of psychological health. They weren't just arguing, I don't want this person coming to my campus. They were saying, how dare you? It will be mentally harmful to, usually not me, but some other person, to even have this person on this campus. And that got me thinking about a theory I'd had about cognitive behavioral therapy for years. But very simply, Coddling the American Mind is trying to figure out what was so different about Generation Z when they started hitting campuses.
And so we're going to go more into these problems, but the biggest thing about the book, you have to check the book out, is that they noticed that it wasn't just something that gradually grew. There was a sharp spike on the college campuses when the kids who were born after 1995 became of age for college. So I asked them what they found that was so different about these kids.
Well, the pursuit of truth is always provisional, and you always have to have a good old dose of epistemic humility to your conclusions, because something could come along and prove you wrong. But we talked about 6 causal threads that seem to contribute to the peculiar issues we were seeing. The one that conservatives really like to focus on is the last one, which we talk about different ideas of social justice. And that's actually the one we put last, partially because we were so aware of people wanting that to be the entire answer. But we also talked about 5 other things. 2 were about social media. One was the increasing anxiety and depression that seemed to go hand in hand with the increased use of social media. So the other thing that was influenced by social media, in our opinion, was political polarization. That essentially political polarization has heated up to an extent that, and I thought political polarization was a problem 15 years ago, but it just seems to get worse and worse by the year. And as it becomes more of a battle of, good versus evil, it takes on like an almost kind of religiosity. The next section that we talk about are the ones that affect parenting. And we refer to this as paranoid parenting, where we introduce the idea of safetyism, the idea that there's no safe is safe enough, which we think is a fundamentally dysfunctional way to view the world. The surprise one that we added in was lack of free play. Lack of free time for a lot of the kind of students who are going to these fancy schools. We think that actually deserved a chapter on its own, because we think that's very harmful to students developing a sense of autonomy, a sense of creativity, getting used to interacting with each other. And then the final 2 are about things that are uniquely problems in higher education. Now, I mentioned the social justice, as our final causal factor, but the one that doesn't get nearly enough attention and is actually the longest chapter in the book is about the hyper-bureaucratization of universities, and universities as very administratively run giant mega corporations has a big effect on the work that I see day to day on campus. Because yes, sometimes free speech battles on campus are ideological. Other cases, they might be dressed up as ideological, but when it comes down to it, it's oftentimes a mid-level administrator who doesn't like this particular student, doesn't like this particular group, doesn't like this particular professor. So we think those are the sort of 6 causal threads. I am considering adding a 7th to it, which I'm talking with Hyde about at the moment, which is income stratification. That essentially part of the fever, of the intense focus on getting your kids into some of these fancy schools is the idea that they're a ticket to remaining in the economic upper class. And since that class has gotten so wealthy over the past several decades, and the middle class is sort of sputtering, to a degree, I think there is a real sense of, oh my God, we have to get into these impossible to get in schools in order to maintain, our position, our socioeconomic position. And I think that pressure to do that also has a distorted effect on the way people think.
So Greg gave us a lot there, and a lot of the things are intertwined. But if you go to the bureaucracy and the safetyism, and you stick with those for a moment, I think those are overarching things. And the book opens with an interesting story from his co-author, Jonathan Haidt. He tells the story of his son starting preschool and how he and his wife have to go to this orientation. So they're telling them all the rules and the guidelines, thing they have to do, and he thinks they're spending an awful long, incredibly long amount of time on allergies and peanut allergies, and don't bring peanuts in schools. And then they go on and they say, well, then some other kids, can't have any tree nuts, so don't bring tree nuts or anything that's been close to that. And it spirals into this weird bureaucracy, as you say. And I will finish that story on the other side. Coming up, I continue my discussion with Greg Lukianoff, president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back to the show. I am continuing my interview with Greg Lukianoff, the president of FIRE. And at the end of the last segment, I was finishing the story of his co-author, Jonathan Haidt. So in this preschool orientation, they're going back and forth. They're spending all this time on what you can't bring in because of the peanut allergies. And so he stopped. And he just asked what he thinks is a logical question, and he turns to the other parents and says, okay, do any of your kids have allergies? Because he thought that peanuts are fine, but they're going down this rabbit hole of banning everything. And the teachers just got incredulous and said, you can't ask that. You're putting people on the spot. It's just the rules. Don't bring anything. And I laughed because when I was reading this book, the same thing happened to me. Rushing out to take my kid to preschool, didn't have anything to eat for breakfast, and he had this breakfast bar. It's healthy, but he liked it, and I was going to give it to him. And the teacher's like, you can't give him that, no peanuts. I said, there's no peanuts in it. They said, well, no tree nuts. There's no nuts in it at all. And as we're going back and forth, I look around and I realize we're in a classroom that fits about 40 people, and it's split between bigger and smaller toddlers. And there's no one in the room but me, my son, and the teacher who's debating this with me. So now you would think you would just let them eat it and then say, next time do X, Y, Z. But no, my choices were let them starve or take them outside like a vagrant in the winter and let them eat outside in the cold. This is the safetyism that they're talking about. And I tell Greg that I believe that all the stuff is true and these problems are huge, but they didn't build, out of nowhere. And I say it's all downstream of the culture. And we did things in the past, in the 70s and the 80s, not instilling work ethic, promoting sexual promiscuity, excusing bad behavior. All these things kind of softened us made us susceptible to these bad conditions. And I asked him about that. Here's clip 5.
I think that I definitely think you're onto something. And I definitely do get a little tired of seeing, as a dad myself, that dads consistently shown as buffoons. I also grew up at the same time with not a particularly strong father figure. So in some way, it rang a little true to me. Like we lovingly refer to our father as Uncle Dad sometimes. So I definitely understand it. But I think one of the things you're getting at is a distinction as someone who, as you can tell, really cares about class issues a lot. Was one thing that we wanted to hit in the and make very clear in Coddling the American Mind is that the issues that are facing the kind of kids who go to the elite schools and the issues that are facing the kids who are from bottom half or even bottom 3 quartiles, which is amazing to think of social economic status, are very different. And I think that it's almost bizarrely different. Well, I went from, I started working when I was 11 and I went to Stanford for law school, like definitely not the kind of place I ever imagined I would be. And there was this real detachment from the rest of the country. And one thing that really bothered me was there was also a real disdain for it, that essentially like a contempt. I remember actually having, and this is a good friend, otherwise not nice guy, bragging about how much he hated Kansas. Like about how much he hated like people from middle America and like really with this. And I'd have to explain, the way I'd put it is, listen, I grew up in Yugoslavia. Sorry. My dad grew up in Yugoslavia. And so I grew up hearing about Yugoslavia all the time. And if you were to say, man, I hate those Croatians, or man, I hate those Montenegrins, like, wouldn't that sound kind of messed up to you that you'd be painting with such a broad brush? To say that you hate everybody like in Kansas, what was like really offensive to me. But that gets kind of a free pass in the way people talk about things when they go to these elite schools, rather than making them more sophisticated to a degree. And we talk about this as the third great untruth, that life is a battle between good people and evil people. So and what's funny is I obviously take issues with police abuses very seriously, and what happened to George Floyd is of great concern to me. And a lot of these things that happen, they genuinely horrify me. However, when this happened, and when we were all suddenly aware of some of these really bad influences, like Eric Garner, for example, there was an opportunity to do something concrete about it. To be like, listen, if we were to impose the following reforms, maybe some of these abuses wouldn't happen, and we'd have get back to a happy medium of effective policing but less abuse. Somehow, it just turned into rather than actually focusing on how can we fix this, it turned into how can we get professors fired. How can we get, students unadmitted from schools for things they wrote on YouTube or things that they wrote when they were 13? I feel like the solution, there's a real lack of solutions to any of this stuff. Like the idea that, like, how do we actually make things better has been replaced with this idea that the only thing you can really do is just feel greater and deeper guilt and shame.
Well, he mentioned something about fathers, and that's because I said something to him about how the fathers on TV, the culture changed, and it went from two-parent household to the father being there but being a buffoon, and then to not being there at all, is where that came from. And the next thing I asked him, though, was about self-esteem, and if he thought that self-esteem movement was part of the problem. Here's his response.
I think the self-esteem movement was a big cultural dead end that was more harmful than helpful. I think about it, like the Greatest Love of All by Whitney Houston, if we were about the same age, was everywhere, and everybody knows all the lyrics by heart. But it basically is it has within it the theory that essentially it's just loving yourself that actually fixes everything. And there's been some great research on this. Roy Baumeister has written some stuff about the absolute tragedy of the self-esteem movement. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to name the book. I never loved the title, Coddling the American Mind. I wanted to name it Disempowered, because what I want to say is I feel like we're taking some of these really bright, capable kids and telling them stuff that's going to mess them up. And not the least of which is, just believe in yourself, just feel good about yourself, is a formula for apathy. The formula for doing, and it turns out, actually, shock upon shock, that what tends to make people have self-esteem is doing really good things and accomplishing good things and having real reason to be proud of themselves. So it was as if we were telling people to be complacent, and that would fix everything. There's a book by Amy Chua and Jeb Rudenfeld at Yale called The Triple Package that I wanted to dislike, because, Amy Chua wrote the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. It's pretty much the opposite of a lot of what we say in Coddling the American Mind. But, definitely as a first generation American and growing up around a lot of other, kids who were first generation or working class, they said that there were sort of three things that really were cultural advantages, particularly for immigrant groups. One of them was first, believing you're special. Which sounds like the self-esteem movement. But then the next one is believing that you have to prove it, that you have to earn it. That means special obligations. That means special, that essentially, like, this is something to live up to, and it's not easy. And the last one is self-control, that essentially some amount of discipline. If you have those three together, that's one of the reasons why, I'm very proud. I'm downright obnoxious about the fact that, first generation people and immigrants, we know we're disproportionately innovative and disproportionately helpful to the economy and all this kind of stuff. But if you teach people just, you're great, and none of the other two, it's like, great, you just gave them a formula for complacency.
Definitely. This has always been my pushback against when I talk about the culture. I know I talk a lot about race because it's in the media, but it's all about shifting the norms and then expecting people to respond positively. You have to get this book. In the book, he keeps talking about one of the other things, one of these untruths. What he's talking about is they identify at the beginning of the book 3 untruths that are both prevalent and dangerous. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. The opposite, right? Always trust your feelings. Always trust your feelings. These are the 3 untruths that lead to the coddling of the American mind. Last, life is a battle between good people and evil people. This is how you can say everybody who supports Trump is evil. Everything is bad here. Everybody on the left is this. And when you talk in extremes, you go nowhere. But this is the thing we're talking about, the self-esteem being bad and work ethic being good. My point about the self-esteem being bad, I bring that up because I think you want people to be strong and have confidence in themselves, but telling everybody you're good at this all the time doesn't solve everything. If mommy and daddy keep telling you, boy, nobody can run as fast as you, and then you run a race and you lose, instead of saying, man, I got to get better, you're like, but mommy said I was faster than everybody else. He must have cheated. It must be unfair. And this is what that leads to. More with Greg Lukianoff, president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. On the other side, you're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Forever trusting who we are. No, nothing else matters.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back to the show. Give us a call at 312-642-5600 if you'd like to discuss the coddling of the American mind or share your thoughts on how we combat the cancel culture and protect free speech. We are listening to an interview I did earlier in the week with Greg Lukianoff, president of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And next, I expressed my concern to Greg that we need everybody involved in this fight, but what we have is academics writing books for other academics. So how does the information get to those who need it? Here is his response.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Like, in some ways, I'm glad that more people are reading sort of the academic books written for academics, because it shows how thin they actually are. I mean, like, white fragility is based on just stereotype after stereotype of white people that is ridiculous. Like, the idea that propagating this kind of paranoid idea that white people behind the scenes are secretly enjoying the suffering of black people is just like, I'm sorry. I grew up, in an environment where we had people from all different backgrounds, and the greatest sin in the 80s was racism, even back then. And they act like, oh, we only discovered racism in 2020. And so in some ways, I'm glad that there's more focus on how sort of bad some of the thinking is here. I'm horrified that it continued. There are people who come to believe it. I do think that I think that in terms of sort of some of the academic rules that mess up possible solutions, one of them is something that sounds like a good rule to have, is don't engage in quote unquote victim blaming. That essentially there's this very strong, like, if you say like that person should have done this other thing, for example, when it comes to drinking on campus, the rhetorical tactic, drinking sexual assault, the rhetorical tactic is that if you say to your daughter, don't get blackout drunk at a party, that gets turned very quickly into, you're saying they deserve to be assaulted, which of course is nonsense, which is a horrifying thing to say. It's like, nobody's saying that, but rhetorically it's really useful. And the idea is that that's victim blaming, that basically if you say anything to somebody about this could actually help mitigate your harm, for example, or really help you out, that's victim blaming. And this taboo is so strong, it shuts down entire swaths of productive conversation that could actually be empowering to some of these people we're actually trying to help. Otherwise, and this is one of the reasons why I think it angers our board member, John McWhorter, so much, is it makes people, whether they're working class or minority or gay, simply objects that are acted upon, as if they have no agency, as if they have no autonomy, and really they're just the subject to these invisible forces. And if you really want to harm somebody, tell them they have no control over their own lives.
So it is clear and obvious that this stuff is simply foolishness. My belief is that it has to crumble at some point under its own weight. So I asked Greg, when does he see this happening?
I think that there's going to be a real reckoning during the Biden administration because there are, now I have to refer to myself as old school liberals like me who have that combination of sort of 60s, I'd love there to be universal health care, but I also don't trust the government all that much. I'm suspicious of the CIA, I'm suspicious of power. I do think business is good, like all these kind of things that were very normal mainstream beliefs for a Democrat to have, a working class Democrat to have, is being pitted against this highly, and this makes people mad when I say this, but upper class idea that comes out of academia that's based in, to a large degree, sort of Marxist philosophy and postmodernist philosophy, which is about as elitist as can be imagined, which I always thought was going to be just laughed away at some point. But it's being treated very seriously. If you haven't read Helen Pluckrose's book, Cynical Theories, it's devastating and scary. I think there's going to be a real reckoning between the hardcore progressive upper class academic ideologues and the people who actually want to make the world a little bit better. And I'm just afraid what this is going to look like. I would never expected when I was in college, I always thought about the academic who still wanted communist revolution was our kind of like dirty little secret on the left, essentially kind of like, these are our crackpots. And no way did I ever imagine that some of them would win. And now I'm increasingly hearing people, talking about blasting capitalism, talking about, I just read something from a parent who had her daughter go through a class where it was all trying to convince them that communism and the Communist Manifesto was good. And it's like, wow, there was no tension when I was younger between being anti-communist and being a Democrat. But where we're pushing this, it's like I think it's going to crack up sometime in the next 2 years.
But it won't happen unless we can disseminate the information and let people know really how bad it is. I know that there are some people that are balancing between left and liberal, and if they only get conservatives out there saying what's true.
Love show continues on AM 560 The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back to the show. Continuing with Greg Lukianoff, president of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And at the end of the last segment, I was talking about how his points are so salient and so important. And there are a lot of conservatives that are saying the same things, but in our polarized world, no one's going to listen to them. So we desperately, conservatives, need honest liberals to speak up. So I asked Greg, where are the classical liberals like him, and why aren't they pushing back? His response in clip 9.
They exist. Me, Yasha Monk, Jonathan Haidt, my co-author in Coddling the American Mind. Helen Pluckrose is herself a liberal. Iona Italia is a liberal. There's actually a growing number of us, but the way we argue, partially that's bent to the academic way of arguing, increasingly is this series of sort of taboos, one on top of the other. So I accepted too much, the old taboo that if you're a conservative, on campus, if you can figure out someone's conservative, you don't have to listen to them anymore. And that was something that isn't talked about as much, but it was essentially just the norm. It's like, oh, no, we don't have to talk about Thomas Sowell. We don't have to talk about Charles Murray. They don't exist. So you've already gotten rid of 50% of the population, or 85% of the planet, if you understand that a lot of the rest of the world would, fit under the term conservative.
That's big of him to admit that he was ignoring a group of people, and it'd be great if others did. And so, but it's still left. That's the first part. But the second part was, why aren't they pushing back more? And he answered that in clip 10.
It's got to be normalized fighting back against it, and I do think that more and more people are seeing this as ridiculous. The only problem is I also think that we're having more and more students coming out of higher education with this very strong, almost religious belief, and the problem is also since it's so based in personalized taboos. There's this there are people who that you're pointing out are classical liberals or at least liberals circa 1960s, and they're not speaking up. But that's partially because the downside is to be called out as a racist, and people demand that you get fired from your job.
And that's true. We are all about self-preservation, so nobody wants to be canceled. So, it's just this vicious cycle, and they're afraid to speak up because of the repercussions. But I just hope that they'll realize that if enough of them speak up, you can't cancel everyone. But next I move to his important work on college campuses. Like he said, he's been doing this for 20 years at the forefront. It's amazing. But I look at it now and say that the left has decided that they won that battle and moved on to the next phase, which is elementary school, junior high school, and high school. Those kids, 1619 Project and all that. And that's going to be the next battleground. And I asked if FIRE was going to start addressing that.
And that's something FIRE has been trying to step up. I'm actually reading right now a book that someone on FIRE staff is working on, that's specifically about the ideological problems in K through 12, and we're really going to try to step up where we are there. But it's amazing because I refer to it as the perfect rhetorical fortress. That essentially people on higher education have come up with a system of argumentation that allows you to never actually get to the actual argument someone is making, because you're given so many options for dismissing their point of view, and the idea of applying just good rules for argumentation, which is like address the actual argument people are making, even if you don't like them. That has to be one of the rules, or democracies aren't going to work very well.
So the next thing, I'll leave that at that because this is so clear and so perfect that you just run out and pick up the book. I next did challenge him on one of the things in the book. There was a story about a Professor Lisa Durden, adjunct professor at a college in New Jersey, who went on Tucker Carlson a year or so ago, and the topic was an all-black Memorial Day party in Brooklyn, and she said, "Boo-hoo-hoo, you white people are angry because you couldn't use your white privilege to get invited." And she was later fired, which, I'm a free speech guy, and I don't think she get fired, but I felt that the book kind of made it seem like the people were wrong for attacking her. So I said, well, how can we say people should push back, but then at the same time say that they went too far? And here's his response.
Well, it's part of defending, free speech and academic freedom, and she, and when it comes to it, if you're talking about criticizing, I'm 100% with you. I always agree with criticizing. If you're talking about firing, then I'm not with you. Yeah, and that's the reason why we brought up the Lisa Durden situation to begin with, because she lost her job over that, and that's not a precedent that you want. And it is funny because we end up defending, people who don't like our existence, like to paint us as conservative, without bothering to look at the fact that the huge chunk of people we defend oftentimes are actually political liberals. They're just running into people who have a more radical idea of radical ideology than they do.
He's absolutely right. And, it's more of a nuanced thing. I just was bringing it up because, freedom of speech is freedom of speech completely for me, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with the consequences. And my issue was just that in the book, I think they stated that she didn't attend the event, which is true. So she wasn't really defending the exclusion of white students. I believe she was defending the exclusion of white people, maybe not students, but she was completely okay with that. And that's why she was mocking it. But she definitely should have freedom to say it. And I don't even believe in all the open boycotts. Now, I think an individual should say that company doesn't want my business, so I won't give them my business. Totally fine. But to go around and, wave a flag or try to demand other people to shut out a business, I think that's too far too. But it's, you can do it. Your decisions have consequences. Coming up, our final segment with Greg Lukianoff, president of FIRE. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back to the show. We are in our final segment with Greg Lukianoff, president of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And a lot of the problems he's talking about, the great untruths from the book, the cultural decline, are all exacerbated by social media. So I asked Greg what he saw happening in social media, both with the trolls and canceling, as well as the banning of some speech by the administrators. Here's his response.
My big hope there is that when something can't continue the way it's going, it won't. And I do think that people are developing some societal adaptations to social media, and that's my preferred way that it happens, is essentially we get used to the idea that trolls exist. We get used to the idea that people are nasty and really disagree, and that we adapt our culture to some of the unpleasant aspects of human nature that we see on social media. What I'm afraid is going to happen, and this is coming as much from Trump as is from the left, is that there's going to be an attempt at government intervention with social media, and we think that's going to fix things, and it's going to be a disaster. And that's that when it comes to social media, my biggest fear is an overcorrection. And honestly, like Steven Pinker in his book Blank Slate, his way of actually talking about political correctness overall is essentially as an overcorrection. But essentially, it's dealing with a real problem, and it goes in a crazy direction and goes way too far. I get some of the issues, and it is scary. The idea that social media, could just could show absolute preference for some opinions over others and just erase people from that medium. But I think the cure will be worse than the disease.
Yeah, I think that may be true, and we will see what happens. Last, I just wanted Greg to tell us more about FIRE and what he wanted to leave the listeners with.
I appreciate that, Charles. Like I said, I'm the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. We've been doing this, defending free speech on campus since before it was cool. We're 20 years old. I've got about 50 employees doing everything from education to policy reform. We made a documentary about a great civil liberties hero, Ira Glasser. It's called Mighty Ira. We really are trying to change the world. And when it comes down to it, my theory on free speech is as simple as it is radical. And it's weird to think that this is a radical idea in free speech thinking, but it's always important to know what people really think, full stop. And I think that, programs like yours that just allow people to come on and, give their honest opinion, we need more of that, not less. And when people say, like, what if they're saying horrible things? I'm like, then it's best that they believe that. So, if your listeners want to help in this battle, supporting FIRE makes a huge difference.